Hello, everyone. This is Stephen Christie, a mental health professional. Welcome to our podcast where we dwell into the personal mental health journey of individuals and explore the challenges they've overcome. Our aim is to shed light on these mental health issues and create awareness. Join us as we listen to the inspiring stories and gain insight into the important aspect of well being. Today, we have with us Anjali Nair, who is a dedicated counseling psychologist with expertise in diverse therapy areas. She's conducted over 1,000 therapy sessions. She's experienced in teaching at university level and leading various mental health workshops. She's also passionate about promoting psychological well being, committed to continuous learning, and staying updated with latest development in mental health field. And not to forget, this podcasting is in collaboration with Anjali's Psychology Roundtable, which is a series that will encapsulate her trainings, workshops, group discussions, teachings, learning, sharing of knowledge, creating contents, interviews, and panel discussions, and much more. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome Anjali Nair in this podcast.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so
Hello.
much for having me. I
Yes.
think what you're doing is extremely noble and extremely important. It's high time that stories of mental health concerns also come into mainstream conversation. And thank you for creating a platform that facilitates the same.
Yes. Glad to have you here. And
Likewise.
Anjali she has faced panic disorders, and then because which also comes under the umbrella of anxiety. Okay. So, Anjali, would you like to talk about
Hmm.
where it all began, how the anxiety and panic disorder started?
Sure. So, Stephen, my story actually begins in 2012. So, almost 12 years ago. 2010 actually, so 14 years ago. I was in the 10th grade at that time, and as is the case with most psychiatric disorders, the roots are always in the childhood, right?
Hmm.
So I was growing up at a time where even in school, when you hit puberty, I'm sure this is very common, but when you hit puberty, there is a certain sample size that you want to be at in terms of your weight, in terms of, your physicality, everything. And I was in my head, I thought I was slightly healthy. I thought I was chubby, and I wanted to lose the weight. I wanted to look a certain size. I wanted my uniform to fit a certain way. And in hindsight, I think these are perfectly normal thoughts for, a 15-year-old to have. Because in my head, I wanted to be a part of the student council, which was the prefect body of the school, right? I wanted to join the student council. Then we had the farewell party that was going to happen, that year. We It was said that everybody had to pick up a partner from the senior grade, and I thought I wouldn't be chosen if I was a certain size, if I looked a certain way, if my physicality was a certain way. And I don't know about today, but back in the day, these were very prevalent thoughts. And it wasn't just me, but I saw a lot of my classmates also go through the same. Not that, I mean, if my school is hearing this, not that, it was a prerequisite from the school side that children had to be of a certain physicality in order to be a part of the school council. No. But there are just some unwritten rules and expectations that students observe among themselves, to be presentable, in a certain way. And I was subscribing to those standards. These weren't said out loud too much, or they were not they were not written in stone, but this was just like a general understanding that was shared among students. And how school students can be very nasty, right? So
Hmm.
bullying
Yeah.
also was very prominent. So I didn't want to be at the receiving end of any of it, and I wanted to make sure that I was as perfect as I could be when I was, in the grade where I could, stand for student council elections and, do my farewell properly and everything. So, Stephen, I stopped eating completely. Like, I
Okay.
This was during my board exam, my 10th board exam. So during the board exam prep, we used to get like a month full of holidays to prep for the exam. I stopped eating. I started by really reducing the amount of food that I was eating. So I was only eating, like, say, fruits in the morning, or, like, just one item of the breakfast in the morning. And I was barely eating during lunch. Like, I was eating boiled vegetables and boiled peas. I remember I had a phase where I was just eating boiled peas. And I was having fruit again for dinner. But then I switched to having just muesli. For people who don't know, muesli is very much like cornflakes, but it's got some more items in it. There's oats in it,
Hmm.
there's cereal in it, there's some dried candied fruit in it. So I was just having muesli 3 times a day. Two bowls, like katoris of muesli 3 times a day. That's all I was having, and I was going to work out twice in a day. There was a park which was about half a kilometer from my house, so I would walk to the park every day, walk around, run around too much, and then I would come back home. And then again in the evening, I would walk like a mad person. I was walking, and then I would come back home. And my parents were really worried, but I just did not listen to them. You know how rebellious teenagers can be, right?
Yes.
So I did not listen to them. They were worried out of their minds, but I just did not listen to them, and I lost all the weight. I lost all the weight. So up until 10th standard, you have to understand that my personality was very outgoing. I was fraternizing. I had a steady group of friends. I was maybe slightly chubby, but I was my parameters were healthy. As soon as I did this, I dieted and I got rid of the weight and I got back to school. Suddenly the symptoms were all there. I was no longer interested in mingling with people. Like, even though this was by far maybe the thinnest I had been all my life, like, I finally got the body of my dreams, or what was considered to be, ideal back then. Like, the skinny body was really celebrated about 12 years ago, at least in school children.
Yes.
So
Hmm.
even though I got that body, I was not interested in mingling with people. I was not interested in talking to people. I was withdrawing. I was socially isolating. I was not pursuing the hobbies that interested me before 10th grade. But it was 14 years ago, and I did not have the know-how to figure out that, okay, these are the symptoms of something problematic. My parents did, and they took me to a psychologist. And I found that idea very strange, because it was so taboo to go to psychologists. So even though my parents didn't consider it taboo, I was very uncomfortable with the idea. So I refused to go to that psychologist ever again.
So how were
And
you making sense of everything that was going on? Like you said you had lost weight, but you were
yeah,
not feeling so good. Like you did not feel like
no,
mingling with other people. So
no.
at
Huh.
that particular point of time, how did
Hmm.
you make sense of uh, all these things?
I don't think I had the time to process anything, because you have to also understand that I was in the 11th grade. 11th
Hmm.
grade is also supposed to be very academically challenging. So I also
Yeah.
had school. Then I had gotten into the school council. So I had those responsibilities also. I had tuition classes. So my day was so packed that I had no time to process what was going on. And also, maybe anxiety had, I was in the realm of anxiety, maybe in the mild or moderate spectrum. So I also found processing extremely exhausting. As you know, one of the cognitive components of having any kind of neurotic condition is that there is an inherent fatigue, an inherent sense of exhaustion that takes over, even the intellectual capacities of a person. So I didn't have it in me to sit and process what was wrong with me. It could also be coming from a place of me not wanting to come to terms with the fact that, okay, something may
Mhm.
be happening with me, because it was so taboo. So I think I simply shrugged it off. And yeah, I carried on the way that I was doing. And I think one of the reasons why this may have also happened and it hit me so hard at that time is because I later found out that the brain does not completely develop by the age of 25. It's only at the age of 25 that the brain completely develops. Now, what I
Right.
was doing is I was starving myself at 15, which is 10 years before the brain completely develops. So I may have also deprived my brain of a lot of essential nutrients and a lot of essential nourishment, which, and I don't know this for sure, I'm just hypothesizing. Now that I think in hindsight, there's so many reasons that come to me. I could have actually hindered the healthy development of my brain, and I could have landed in the throes of a condition.
Mm-hmm.
right? So that is why
Yes.
I thought talking about this dieting period, excruciating time of depriving myself of food and almost starving, played such a huge role in probably what I'm experiencing ever since, because I was perfectly fine till the day before I started this process. And there were the telltale signs were all there. Suddenly I left the steady group of friends that I had. Suddenly I wanted to mingle around with other people, that too in a very limited way. Like I said, I was withdrawing from the things that interested me earlier. Nothing in particular interested me. So all of those telltale factors began to like settle in after this episode,
Mm-hmm.
and it has been like that ever since. I later, I also went on to do my undergraduation. Patterns were very similar even there. The weight has been going up and down, and I then came back, and I went ahead and I did a job also. Like after my undergraduation, I joined a very popular food tech company. I worked there for a bit. It's only when I left that company. In fact, no, actually, when I was working at that organization, I took therapy even then. I went to a therapist who was close to my house, and I went to therapy, I think, for about 6 months then. And it didn't help me much because look, one thing about therapy is that you have to be truly committed to wanting to change or wanting to help yourself. I didn't
Yes.
take therapy like that. I took therapy as an emotional crutch that I wanted to maybe pity myself more. There was also a heartbreak situation that had happened around that time. So I think I was looking at, an emotional support in therapy. So obviously it didn't last too long for me. And then when I got back and I had another, like I worked briefly with another news company, and then I got back, and as you know, like I then pivoted towards psychology. I started, picking up programs, and I was doing postgrad diplomas in psychology. That's when I
Okay.
realized that I put two and two together and realized that, oh, this is probably what is happening to me. So I must get help. And I must give it to my parents through all of this. They've been so supportive. Every time I wanted to join therapy, they've been very supportive emotionally,
Mhm.
financially, in every which way. And never did they hold it against me. Never did they keep throwing it in my face that had I not dieted. Of course, they gave me a very healthy understanding of what they thought, and they were not at all pleased with the way I had conducted myself in the form of dieting and whatever, or delaying my treatment. But they never held it against me, that
Yes.
I did not take therapy in time, or that I did not, do the right by me.
And also,
uh
so during this whole
yeah.
phase, from your school year to when you did your graduation, and
Yeah.
when you started working, so did you
Hmm.
ever come to the terms with that maybe something is not going right, or
Absolutely.
what was it? Was it that you just went to the therapist because your parents just told you to?
No, no, no. So, like I said, I had like at the back of my mind, I had an idea that something wasn't okay, but I would
Hmm.
always put up a charade. I didn't want to accept to myself that something wasn't okay, because it was taboo. It was stigma to feel that there is something wrong with me at a mental level. And I fell prey to it because I had no understanding of psychology. Psychology and psychiatry are also in their middle ages. They're just about 40,
Yeah.
45 years old as a formal science. So for me to know all of this and to normalize it for me 15 years ago was seemingly impossible, personally, for me. So
Hmm.
I never let myself accept that maybe there was something wrong with me. So I would put up an act as if everything was okay, and I would, mingle around with people, putting up a charade all the time, which was again so exhausting. Which is why when I finally reached my room, my hostel room, my comfort zone, wherever I was, I would be exhausted because how much can you act?
Right.
Right. So, why did I go to therapy? The first time I went to therapy was because I was heartbroken. There was a relationship that did not work out. So, I was heartbroken. That's why I went to therapy. Then, when I finally did start studying psychology, I actually went to therapy because I wanted help with what I was feeling. But then again, I feel that, look, therapy is a facilitative process. It doesn't do the work for you. You have to
Hmm.
do the work. And there's a
Right.
lot of inner work. There is a huge amount of commitment which is required from the person who's seeking therapy in order to actually enjoy the fruits of therapy.
Yes.
I wasn't ready to put in the work. I wanted a quick fix. I didn't want to put so much work because I didn't have it in me. I think by then I was so deep into the throes of whatever it is that I was experiencing that I didn't have it in me to put in that kind of work. I was not convinced to be putting in that much work. So my second round of therapy also was not very successful because I wasn't committed to the process. I spent a lot of
So
money.
during this whole
Yeah.
process, how do you try to cope with these things? Because
Hmm.
therapy is one way that you
Correct.
went out and sought help. But were
Hmm.
there some other ways in which you tried to, cope with all these things by yourself?
Very short lived, Stephen.
Okay.
I would maybe try and follow a routine, but that didn't last very long. I would try and incorporate movement in my, day to day. That didn't last very long. I would uh,
Hmm.
I would never sit with my feelings. I would never sit in the discomfort of what I was experiencing. I would distract myself into maladaptive coping mechanisms, like maybe having a lot of food, or which again would result in me putting on weight, which would further throw me into, deeper isolation because I did not like the way that I was looking. So I was on a hamster wheel. I wasn't doing anything about my condition, which was maybe exacerbating my condition, because of which I was using maladaptive coping mechanisms, which made me feel worse, which was,
Yeah.
propelling me deeper into my condition. So I was on a hamster wheel. It was a very vicious cycle. So I did a bunch of things to cope, but it was a very, very like far and few and very short lived.
Yes.
It was
So I
only
think a lot of
le-
the coping mechanism that
yeah.
you mentioned, distracting yourself, not trying to
Hmm.
sit down with your feelings, it was more about, like defense oriented coping where you did not try to deal with the problem, but just
Hmm.
just maybe trying to escape it.
100%. 100%. I was escaping it. I never, because I didn't want to deal. If I wanted to deal, I would have done the work in therapy. I
Hmm.
would have come back
Yes.
home, and in the other 6 days where I didn't have therapy, I would have put in conscious work. Today, I myself am a therapist and I have clients. And Stephen, some of my clients are so diligent. I see the amount of work they put in because they have the
Hmm.
inherent motivation to want to be better, evolved versions of themselves. And I realize how not that I blame myself for it. I don't talk negatively with myself for it because I know that I didn't have the bandwidth to do it. But I just see the stark difference between when I was taking therapy and my absolute ability to put in the kind of work, and these
Hmm.
people who are putting in so much work. There's so much parity in these two that I actually now know why I wasn't feeling better. And there was also something that was happening circumstantially. The second time also, when I started taking therapy, the therapist was great. She really tried to pull me out of the way that I was feeling. It's just that I didn't comply. And
Right.
also, again, there was a heartbreak again there. So that also derailed my attention from wanting me to heal to then focusing on the on and offs of, my the romantic aspect of my life. It's only now, after that, like once I took a break from taking therapy the second time, and I got into my master's full time. Here I was doing psychology, I was working at the counseling cell, all of that was happening. And then COVID happened.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
COVID happened, and we were indoors. We were indoors for about, this was 2021 May. We had been indoors since 2020. We never stepped out of the house. We never stepped out to, buy groceries, nothing. We would call groceries home because I had a 67, 68-year-old father who already had a comorbidity, and I had a not so young mother as well. So we would not step out. We were very, very particular. But as luck may have it, we still got COVID, and we got COVID in the second wave, which was the worst wave so far. And we got COVID somehow. Maybe the house above ours had COVID, so we got COVID from there.
Hmm.
And my dad got really sick. His saturation was dropping, and we had no idea that his saturation was dropping because we didn't even have an oximeter at home. I'm really
Right.
sorry if this begins to sound a little morbid now. I want to give a trigger warning that there's going to be death that I'm talking about. So if any of our listeners finds that triggering, I think they can skip this part. But um we didn't have an oximeter also because we didn't even think that we would get COVID because we had not stepped out. Everybody was saying stay indoors, and we were the masters, one of the masters of staying indoors, because who doesn't step out of the house for a year and a half? We didn't.
Hmm.
So we had no idea that this was happening, and I just happened to take an online consult for my dad, and everybody told me that this is COVID and I need to get help for him. and his COVID had gotten really aggressive. Apparently, his oxygen was really low. So then mom and I had COVID as well. We had no idea. We got him. We couldn't find a hospital then. I'll quickly go through this bit. We couldn't find a hospital then. We put him in an ambulance. We had to get him back from the ambulance because there was no hospital, no bed, no ventilator, no
Yeah.
oxygen, nothing. Anyway, it was those dark black times. And then we had to finally put him in a government facility, and we got back home around 1:32 in the night. And in a couple of days we had test reports that said we had COVID too, and I had particularly aggressive COVID. And then a couple of days later, and through all of this, my dad would call in the middle of the night, and they were very like they were he would cry on the phone, and that absolutely broke me as a daughter. And one of my closest friends was also admitted in the hospital at that time. So I was basically up round the clock, help,
Hmm.
like, taking care of my dad along with my mom, and also simultaneously waiting on hearing from my friend, right? Because as somebody with anxiety, I had very far and few friends, and at no cost wanted to lose this friend because I was getting bad news from everywhere.
Yeah.
And
There's also a feeling of a lot of helplessness because when a person is admitted in the hospital, there is hardly anything you can do for them. You can go and
yeah,
meet them.
absolutely. And with my dad calling at odd hours in the middle of the night and complaining with things like, then he doesn't get food. He's not given his basic medicines. Like, he was on blood pressure medicines. Nobody was giving him his blood pressure medicines. I had to call up the hospital. I had to beg them to give him his medications. Anyway, I don't know how true that was. I don't know if it was under the effect of COVID that he was saying this. But what had happened was that I had gotten used to getting startled in the middle of the night, to
Hmm.
like sounds
Right.
of the phone, to sounds of people falling, because my entire building had COVID, so people were fainting in the middle of the night, and that was really startling me. And finally, on the 10th of May 2021, I got a call early in the morning saying that this has happened. Your father's no more, and please do the needful. And I had to keep it in. I couldn't say it to my mom as well, because it was 5:30 in the morning and we both had COVID, and I didn't want her to get upset or like affected because of this. I had a relative, my brother-in-law was on call with me when I got this news from the hospital. He graciously agreed to be on call with me, and he was always available at all times for me.
Hmm.
And I got this
Right.
news, and I had to keep it inside me for half a day. I couldn't say it to my mom, and it was just me and my
It
mom.
must be really difficult.
Yeah, because grieving is never in isolation, right?
Yes.
COVID was the only time where everybody was grieving in isolation. It's usually the family comes over, people come together. It's a collectivist affair. Here I was, where I was barely breathing thanks to my COVID. And on top of that, I had to keep this inside me, and I couldn't even process the tears, the emotions, the crying. So it had become like a big ball in my chest. And that's the
Hmm.
day when my COVID medication also started. So, Stephen, the first time I had my COVID medication was also on the 10th of May. And I took my medication and I suddenly got palpitations. Palpitations, meaning, now this was the first clinical symptom that I ever had. And I didn't know that this was a symptom of anxiety. So I was having palpitations, and my palpitations were off the roof. And nobody, even the doctors, couldn't understand why that was happening. Like, I was
Hmm.
clocking, I think, I don't remember now, but over, I think, 150, heartbeats on the oximeter. My pulse was over, I think, I can be wrong. I don't want to sound factually wrong, but it was really high. And I was very, very tensed because I didn't know why my heart was beating so hard. I told my doctors, and they said they asked me to do some blood tests. I did my blood test. They said everything's fine. They didn't think anything was wrong with me physiologically. They asked me to wait a couple of days. I waited a couple of days. My heart, every time I took the medicine, I would dread that time because I know for the next hour my palpitations would be off the roof. And then finally they said, you know what, nothing is wrong with you at a bodily level. Why don't you see a psychiatrist? Because this can be maybe, something to do with your mental well being. Now, again, it's
Hmm.
lockdown. I didn't even know which psychiatrist to go to. So I, at that time, called up the HOD of our department, and I took him into confidence. The department, meaning the department where you and I studied from. I took the HOD into confidence, and I told him that this is the case. And he was very kind and supportive at that time. And I kept discussing with him as to what I should do. And then I told him that, I'll I'll probably consult my current psychiatrist, the
Mhm.
psychiatrist that I now I'm going to ever since COVID, because he had come to teach us once. He taught us during my postgrad diploma. His name is Gautam Amin, Dr. Gautam Amin. And I said, you know what? He's the only psychiatrist I know. Even the HOD didn't know many. He suggested a homeopathic doctor, and I spoke to the homeopathic doctor on call, and she told the HOD that, listen, her condition is serious. She should see a psychiatrist. So I
Right.
suggested having to see. I said that Dr. Gautam Amin is the only doctor I know. He's taught us, so let me try calling him. And the HOD said, yeah, do that. So I got in touch with Dr. Amin, and I told him everything that was happening, and he told me one sentence. Like, I told him everything that happened. My dad passed. I started my medication on the same day this started happening. And he said, this is anxiety. And I said, that was the first time somebody had put a label on what I was
Mhm.
experiencing.
Yeah.
That was my first formal diagnosis. And he put me on an SOS medicine. I had that medicine, Stephen, for about a month till my COVID healed. And then once I was tested negative, I went to him. And then my journey with medication started. So then he
Right.
prescribed a cocktail of medication to me, and it took me a while to acclimatize to it. We had to switch it up a couple of times, as is the case with most psychiatric medications. It's not a one size fits all. Most people have to keep, voraciously communicating with their psychiatrist till they can come to the sweet spot of what suits them, what cocktail of medication suits them. I did the same thing. It was very difficult to step out and go to another hospital during peak COVID, but I didn't have an option.
Could you
And
briefly describe all the symptoms that you were facing during this particular time?
Sure.